Ladies and gentlemen, will you give a very, very warm welcome to Lord Michael Heseltine.
Jerry, can I say at once to you and to Andy how privileged I am to speak here in this great town hall in this great city today, and to thank so many of you coming, many of you a long way, to this occasion. Times of great crisis evoke memories of a time when this nation stood alone. Don't you know there's a war on, prodded inactivity into life. Women flocked to the factories, land girls heavy lifted on the land. A generation of volunteers who had never worked before reinforced the social services, and certainly we were all in together, and I remember it well. They say that old men forget, but none of us who lived through that time will ever forget the sacrifice and suffering, the carnage, ultimately the victory. And that is why I hesitate to compare the crisis of then with where we stand today. There is another essential difference. Then the enemy was at the gate, a clear and immediate threat, a world of black and white, a focus sharper than crystal, a future ice cold. Today's crisis is very different. The long-term competitiveness on which our wealth depends is slipping away. To secure it, we need a national commitment, discipline, every individual straining every sinew, not for a day, a week, or a year, but on and on, as more nations enhance their skills, marshal their strength, motivate their people to grasp a larger share of the world's wealth. And failure for us, though, has none of the trauma of occupation, of foreign tyranny, of freedom lost. Failure today is measured in drift, in mediocrity, in underperforming public services and underinvested businesses, in infrastructure, out of date, a nation with its head hung down in the shadow of world events. A nation reconciled to genteel discomfort, envious of what once was, hopeless of what might have been. And if we accept such a posture, the enemy would not only be at the gate, the enemy would already be within. The enemy named complacency, indifference, underused resource, waste of misapplied energy. No one will advocate that. No electorate will vote for it. But the question that matters is the degree to which all of us, government, companies, institutions, people themselves, will work differently to avoid it. And if we are all in this together, we all need to behave and perform as though we recognize it and intend to do something about it. It is easy in modern Britain to point to examples of excellence. We have world-beating companies in manufacturing and the services. We have academic excellence led by 4 of the world's best universities. We have a civil service free of corruption. We have a language, a history, an environment spoken, respected, and envied in every corner of the globe. So we should take great pride, but a harsh world will judge us by wider standards, by the standards of our average, by the slowest ships in the convoy, by whether everything we do is good enough. And the examples of excellence give grounds to show what we can do, what we can achieve. They're not, however, typical of national performance. They need to be seen as standards to achieve, not grounds for complacency. I chose to make this speech in Birmingham, and no building could be more appropriate. It stands as a monument to the wealth and political power generated by the city's entrepreneurial leaders in the 18th and 19th centuries. In those days, it was frequently filled with local people who gathered to debate the great political issues of their time. Their voices resonated across the country. The leaders they produced, of whom Joseph Chamberlain is the best known, became leaders of the nation. But those days are now a distant memory. The great entrepreneurs who built Britain's great cities and who drove our country to the forefront of the Industrial Revolution were powerful and ruthless men. The cities they built in their time were overwhelmed by the exponential growth of the industrial workforce they attracted and by the terrible urban conditions that resulted. Those conditions were intolerable, and the democratic process rightly demanded change. The cities themselves could not fund this, so the national government intervened. Central funding ceded power to London. Local government focused increasingly on social provision. Councillors drawn increasingly from the public sector. The power of Whitehall grew. Ministers and civil servants concentrated on specific and individual functions: housing, transport, education, the environment. But slowly but remorselessly, the entrepreneurs that created the cities on the basis of local strength were replaced by the functional monopolies of Whitehall. However desirable the change, it reduced the emphasis on growth. Whitehall increasingly ceased to trust local leadership, and so more and more powers were drawn into Whitehall and its national quangos. National initiatives were rolled out across the country, irrespective of local conditions. I can only ever remember a cabinet discussion that focused on place once, and that was after the Liverpool riots of 1981. My experience in Liverpool after the riots, working with the local community and their leaders to address the root causes of their problems, showed me that there is a better way. When local partners work together, that local initiative is more powerful than anything that London can produce. Sir Terry Leahy and I helped to devise a vision for the future growth a year or so ago of that great community. And the response was immediate. The local people, they knew what needed to be done. So we need to reinvigorate that local leadership across our country, including greater devolution in London itself. And Whitehall's ambitions should be to do less, but to do it better. Of course, we don't need to change. We could carry on as we are. But I believe that that would be unacceptable. I do not detect an appetite in this country for so unambitious a future. And certainly the government itself is not prepared to stand by whilst other nations overtake us. And that is why we need to complete and to compete in a rapidly changing world where the competition is intensifying year by year. We cannot hope to do that unless every part of this country is able to contribute fully to our national effort. We need to make the most of every opportunity for wealth creation and growth. And let's be frank, to say that is the easy bit. The government has had to tackle the worst economic crisis of modern times. The government has a radical agenda to reform education. It has an ambitious program to get people off benefits. There is no greater sign of the government's confidence and strength than its willingness to encourage me to produce a report which the opportunists will use as a basis for criticism. I am no critic of this government. I am so enthused by what they have achieved to be secure in my confidence of what more they can do. My report urges the government to build on what it is already doing, to speed up the process and to leave no stone unturned in pursuit of growth. How then can we get there? There's no new money and there's no quick fix. We need a new partnership between the private and public sectors, between local communities and central government, the better use of public money and consequently the levering in of additional private investment. Such a statement may not sound new. It would, I think, have evoked widespread support over many years and under different governments. There have been initiatives and experiments, but what there has not been is a comprehensive long-term implementation strategy to turn the thought into practice. That is why I so strongly welcome both what the government has done and, even more importantly, what it says it intends to do. So what has it done? City deals. Greg Clark, the Minister for Cities, has demonstrated what localism can look like and how it can work. Business rates retention. Eric Pickle's proposals will allow councils, for the first time, to keep a proportion of business rates in their area, giving them greater control of their own funding. Nick Clegg's Regional Growth Fund is unleashing local creativity and bringing private sector jobs to parts of the country that need it most. Patrick McLaughlin is giving local areas a greater say in the major transport schemes that their communities depend upon. In addition, this government has created a framework of local enterprise partnerships to reflect the strengths of both the public and private sector in a context that reflects the local economy, local identity and local pride. There are now 39 LEPs covering England. So this country has a framework that replicates the strengths of the city-states in all our competing economies. It is no longer a case of waiting for London. The army, it now has its fighting divisions. The immediate challenge is to bring them up to strength and to give them the tools to do the job. This is already government policy. 20 of the 39 LEPs are now involved or will be involved in city deals. As the Deputy Prime Minister's speech on Monday clearly indicates, this has the potential of a dynamic national polity. I agree with him. There is no case that these new ideas apply to only a part of the framework that the government itself has created. There is no case to argue that part of the country should be held back whilst another part is encouraged to surge forward. So much, therefore, for my analysis. Let me turn to some of my proposals and expand on them. I think we need a National Growth Council, chaired by the Prime Minister, comprised of Secretaries of State and outside experts in the model of the National Security Council. The government should set out a comprehensive national growth strategy, defining its view of its own role and the limits of that role, together with those of others in local authorities, public bodies, and the private sector in the pursuit of wealth. As well as a clear strategy, the government needs the means by which it can deliver it. Far too often, ministers pull the levers only to find they are connected with elastic. And so initiatives come and go, and a collective cynicism gathers as to the limits of what a government can actually achieve. It breeds inertia. But this government is making positive moves. It has recruited Paul Dayton, fresh from his brilliant achievements in delivering the Olympics, to manage its infrastructure agenda. It has pulled the city's work into the Treasury under the continued leadership of Greg Clark. The Treasury has sponsorship of the financial services industry, so the vehicle for implementation already exists. The new National Growth Council would have oversight of the growth strategy and would be responsible for approving the plans of individual departments. Underneath the Shadow Growth Council, there would be a Shadow Growth Council led by the Commercial Secretary to the Treasury, which would bring together the permanent secretaries of the Whitehall departments. Each individual department would be expected to set out its contribution to the growth strategy, including how it will work with the wealth-creating sectors that it sponsors. Many departments do not see that they have a role to play in the growth agenda. A central vision for wealth creation can only be properly achieved when all departments single-mindedly pursue it. Growth cannot be laid out at the Treasury or the Business Department alone. It requires Whitehall as a whole to sign up. It's easy to see how this applies to some departments. Improvement in our rails and airports, self-evidently transport. Investment in thousands of new homes, DCLG. The procurement of billions of pounds worth of defence equipment, the Ministry of Defence. But the link to growth is less obvious elsewhere. It's welfare policies to get people back to work. The education of our young people, ensuring they have the basic skills to survive in the workplace. The challenges of keeping an aging population healthy and independent. Just as local places need private sector input into decisions to ensure that they are consistent with growth, so does central government. So that partnership with the public and private sector through the LEPs is established. But in central government, they now have a network of non-executive directors led by Lord Brown, and here is the strength to be built on. And my plans formalise their roles in many ways. The non-executive directors should be given an enhanced role in the departments for which they are responsible. In addition, they should be represented on the National Growth Council. They should have a strengthened role in the development of departmental business plans, ensuring growth commitments within those plans are imaginative enough. And they should be able to advise Secretaries of State in the appointment of permanent secretaries. Crucial to the ability of these non-executive directors to fulfill this expanded role, there are two key changes. First, and most simply, they need a secretariat to help them in their duties. And second, they need access to a proper management information system. Such a system will not only be of use to non-executive directors as they scrutinise the business of departments, but would be crucial and critical to Secretaries of State and their permanent secretaries in the running of their departments. Any major company, any medium, any small company, collect and use management and finance data. That ought to be inbuilt into any management process. How can one begin to know what is happening without such a detailed analysis at one's fingertips? So a comprehensive management information system will allow departments to see what they do well, what they could do better with more resource, and what they should stop doing altogether. I now turn to the relationship with the private sector. All sectors, in my view, should be offered a formal relationship with government through the most appropriate department. The automobile and aerospace relationships that exist in BIS are good examples. This, together with the sponsorship role of UKTI, should be extended across departments. Our major companies can play a key role in raising the performance of business across Britain, and many of them already do so, nurturing and investing in their supply chains, providing advice, skills, and even finance. And we need to ask that more of them follow the example of the best. I see the business community like a rainforest. Many smaller companies depend on the canopy that big firms provide. Rolls-Royce is a huge, world excellent company. It has 3,000 UK-based suppliers. Jaguar Land Rover, enjoying a renaissance that would excite any observer. 2,000 UK suppliers. So take away that canopy of the rail sites, and the infrastructure could too easily be exposed to unsustainable threat. It would be a mistake to expect government to focus solely on the start-ups and small firms, even though they provide much of the dynamism and innovation in our economy. So government should continue to work with our large and medium-sized companies as well, if it is to strengthen our wealth-creating capacity effectively. And this requires a deep understanding of business and the capability for a professional dialogue and partnership with business. The civil service culture needs to embrace an experience of the private sector. And in this way we can ensure that we have a world-beating public sector which can play its full part in realizing our national potential. Let me come to local enterprise partners. The local enterprise partners should be given the resource to develop local economic plans. And I propose in my report that that should amount to £250,000 for each of the next 2 years. They should then be invited to use these plans to bid comprehensively for part of a national single pot of public money, which would be available from 2015. The single pot would consist of those parts of current post-cuts departmental allocations that are part of supporting growth. The pot could amount to over £49 billion over 4 years, to which could be added another £11 billion of European funding. Government needs to set a framework for this competition, and the government framework would set out its principles and priorities. Of course, a new government might have different policies, different priorities. It could change the bidding document. That would be the natural consequence of democratic choice. But in doing any change, there is a price. Investment is long-term. Investors are increasingly internationally mobile. To the extent that a message of consistency and continuity is possible, the more certain is the investment climate. All political parties should be able to agree on the need for growth. In order to seek growth, to do it without the enthusiastic partnership of the private sector is a mirage. Different governments, different parties, they may well have different priorities for how to spend the new wealth, but it ought to be agreed that they first have to create it before they spend it. Central government needs, I think, to bring together the funding that it applies to so many different initiatives which have an impact on growth, whether it's spending on skills, on local transport, on infrastructure, on housing or regeneration, and turn them into this single pot which can be put to work with local contributions to support the growth strategies of local communities. Now, no government is simply going to hand out the money and walk away. Democratic accountability would not allow it. What we're talking about is a new concept of partnership. As part of that, I believe local government will increasingly need to create simpler structures which are more efficient and easier to deal with. Scotland and Wales moved to a structure of unitary counties decades ago. Many English counties have adopted a unitary structure. Nothing should prevent others, if they want to move in that direction. In the great cities, I welcome the development of conurbation authorities and would welcome the prospect that they should elect a mayor to lead them. The government and private sector should work together to create a strong, locally based business support infrastructure. And central to this would be a determination to help chambers of commerce attract larger local membership. So what can it do to help? There are many things government to do which underpin the national economy. Taxation, regulating markets, investing in infrastructure, skills and the research base. It needs to do each of these things excellently and professionally. But government cannot advise business on how to grow. For that, we need a world-class business support infrastructure that is private sector-led, that is accessible in every community, and has deep reach within each of those local business communities. And that is what every single one of our international competing economies have got. And I set out in my report, and particularly in an annex to my report, the comparisons in detail. The Paris Chamber of Commerce has 400,000 members. The London Chambers have 9,500. When a German company goes to seek business in India, it finds a German chamber with 110 staff and 6,000 members. When a British company goes to India, there is no chamber. If we're going to compete in the world's markets, we need to fill that void. Our chambers of commerce can do it, but we should all help them to raise the game. And that means central government, local government, and above all, local business. Now, I realise that my proposals to enhance the status and capability of our chambers are controversial. But if we intend to galvanise our cities and their communities, if we intend to really involve the local business community, I see no better way than to enhance voluntarily the status and scale of the local chambers. And as I said, I publish in an annex our findings about the scale of what is available in all other competing economies. I accept the vital role that local authorities can play in wealth creation, but I believe that they are stronger in this purpose with private sector partners. And the private sector is divided between competing organisations. And adding together all of them, they represent only a fraction of the million or so companies that might benefit from the advanced services which other countries provide and upon which our export targets depend. Government has set up quangos to undertake activities and provide services that could more easily, more locally, more effectively be led. So let us be frank. There are people who will say, the chambers are not strong enough. To which my reply is, help them. Don't force them. Help them to acquire the strength, but don't undermine their localism with an ever-widening world of quangos. And I say much the same to the trade associations. They can play an important role, particularly in a dialogue with government about their sectoral interests. But there are over 3,000 of them, and there is a need to up their standards and raise the game, and that means rationalisation. I say something about deregulation. Regulation should be carried out in such a way as to have growth at its heart. And this means a restructuring of the regulatory regime in this country in order that the economic consequences of regulation are properly thought through. And my report includes a number of proposals along these lines and similar ways. Our planning system needs to be injected with a sense of urgency to speed up the decision making. I propose that there could be a new power for the planning inspectorate to call in applications after 6 months. I don't seek to change the nature of any decisions, but I do believe that there are jobs and wealth and growth tied up in too many filing cabinets of the local authority planning departments. There is one particular opportunity which government should grasp to help our companies to compete effectively across the world. Government procurement can be improved by bringing in specialists and paying them at a rate that is comparable with the private sector. Government places £238 billion worth of contracts in external bodies every year. In 2010, two-thirds of those contracts were running over time or over budget, or both. And this is a national scandal. Not just because of the waste of our hard-earned wealth. Much worse is the way that a culture of this sort saps the competitiveness of British industry. No company that relies on surviving in that sloppy environment will find it easy to win contracts overseas. So the government has started work to drive professionalism into our procurement functions, and I strongly support it. My report makes 89 recommendations. Some will see them as criticisms, and some will exploit them in that context. That is exactly the wrong approach. For this government to invite criticism from one of its most ardent supporters and long-term members is a sign of strength. To accept such observations is a sign of confidence. I think perhaps we're all too close to the economic crisis. I take the view that there is opportunity out there on a grand scale. Is that glass half full or half empty? It's an attitude of mine. To me, it's half full. There are huge infrastructure demands and there are hungry institutional funds. Bring them together. There is excellence in industry, commerce, academia. Extend it. England's cities are pulsing with energy. Unleash it. Every one of us needs to rise to the challenge. There is no more insistent or compelling motive for the humankind than the instinct to provide for and protect our children, to feed them, to house them, to educate them, and to give them a start in life with the hope that they will be better able to do what we have not then achieved. So let the reaction to this report be judged by the legacy we bequeath to our children and to our grandchildren. We should earn their appreciation for the legacy they will inherit by the commitment that we all make.